Welcome to the Building Doors Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Harst, and today I am joined by Kyong Coleman, a seasoned marketing executive whose career has spanned some of the biggest names in advertising and brand building. She's led brand strategy, content development, and integrated marketing across creative and media agencies like IPG, Omnicom, and WPP, as well as on the client side for brands like Ergo, Dell, Verizon, L'Oreal, Cartier, and Infinity. Oh, so fancy. Her ability to shape narratives and drive measurable business success across industries, from tech and beauty to luxury and automotive, is nothing short of inspiring. I actually met Kyung when she hired me to voice a campaign for Ergo. I talk for a living. A sleek, high-tech hearing aid brand that's changing the way people think about accessibility and innovation. And after our session, one of the producers actually mentioned Building Doors, and that sparked this awesome conversation between us. Kyung shared how important she believes it is to cast with equity, to make sure women's voices are included and represented. And I knew right away that I wanted to take that conversation and bring it here to the podcast. Kyung is a graduate of Wellesley College. She is based in Manhattan with her husband and daughter. Outside of work, she's an avid traveler. She loves to cook, and she's a skier. And I'm sure she'll love to talk to you about how she is an aspiring gardener and a seamstress in training. What you going to make for me? I can't wait for you to hear her perspective on building brands, being a champion of equity, and what it takes to make inclusion not just a value, but a strategy. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm really excited because to me, this whole concept of, I got booked for a VO job, but now it's turning into this lovely conversation about a real person in real life choosing to lead with equity. And I just think that more people need to hear these kinds of conversations so it normalizes what choosing equity and how equity is a strategy in everyone's life. So I want to start off with a question about shaping brand strategy, because let's take it back to the very beginning, because you sit in a unique position that voice actors and most producers don't, which is you're there at the beginning. So you've worked with some of the biggest global brands, from Dell to Cartier to L'Oreal. When you step into shaping a brand strategy, what's the first thing you look for to make sure it connects authentically with the consumer base?
I think it's a matter of balancing kind of what does the brand stand for, right? And what is it, whether it's the widget or the service or whatever it is. And, kind of you have to know yourself. Well, the brand has to be kind of clear in its vision and mission. And who are you trying to kind of connect with that vision and mission, right? And what purpose are you serving? And a lot of times, as a business or as a brand, most of them are trying to reach more than 50% of the human population, right? With the exception of some specific, gender specific, or, certain kind of ethnicity specific even products. But for the most part, and a lot of the brands that I've worked on in my past have spanned either, the whole gamut, and you want to try to get everybody. Or if it's a global brand, you got to think about how does this translate in different contexts, different communities, different kind of societies, etc. So I think it is that kind of, you have to know yourself. You also have to know who you want to talk to and who you're trying to kind of connect or sell to. And that is absolutely critical. And I think that being true to both of those things are going to be more critical than anything, because people can sniff out when it's inauthentic, when it feels kind of like, it's ticking a lot of boxes, but it still doesn't kind of like catch you in your gut. And that's because I think we all know it, and we all know it when we see it and we feel it and we hear it and it feels real and genuine and right. And you also know it when it feels kind of a little bit more contrived and it sniffs a little disingenuous.
So you just brought up a ton of points that I want to ask questions about. And I'm a little selfish right now because I've been a voice actor for 20 years and I would always want to pick someone like you, your brain, right? So this is the time. And I hope that people who are listening in the voiceover world appreciate exactly this line of questioning that I'm about to ask. So you mentioned the sniff test.
Yeah.
In authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
So, as voice actors, we are often told to lead with you, meaning you have to put the you in the script because that can be heard.
Yeah.
So, what kind of things do you do to ensure that the you comes out, whether it be for on camera casting or voice casting? Is there a certain formula that you do? Like, we have to have this copywriter or copywriter with this style, or we have to include this imagery. Like, what kind of things go on here when you're trying to make sure that your spot passes the sniff test?
Well, I think that there's two things, right? And there is the brand of the voice, and then there is for the voice actor. Do we feel like that individual is able to kind of represent and be kind of the human voice version of whatever that brand is, right? And in your case, when we were actually casting for the role that you eventually so ably and wonderfully filled, but we had two things in mind. Hearing loss is something that is actually so underestimated and kind of under aware in terms of just like most people, it's not on their radars. It's an old person's problem. I don't need hearing aids. I don't want hearing aids. There's a lot of stigma still attached or lack of awareness in that, right? But it is also something where if it does go untreated, has some pretty significant kind of implications to that, right? We all started reading the literature around cognitive decline and the connection between that and dementia, and so there's a lot of health related, and then also that hearing loss is not an elderly condition. The average age now, you won't believe. Guess what the average age of kind of the onset of hearing loss is now?
I will guess somewhere between 55 and 65.
Most people do. And you'll be shocked to discover that you're decades off and it's actually 38, right?
What?
Yes, that's not a future me problem. It's probably a you today problem, right? And so I think a lot of folks thought like, oh, it won't be until at least I'm in my 50s and 60s. And 50s and 60s today is also very different. But modern life, earbuds and headphones and, construction and aviation and all traffic, all this stuff and our kind of daily habits have come into kind of making this a problem. So I set this as a very long-winded kind of starter to the response that you're looking for, which is, well, how do you do this? And so we've got this really big problem, and Eargo is representing itself as we really know our stuff when it comes to the technology and being able to come up with a really amazing, technically advanced solution to help people with their hearing loss, but also not forgetting that you might not want to kind of like advertise it out to the world that you're wearing these big honking things. There's comfort, there's practical things, and visibility serves both a kind of technical as well as a cosmetic, right, an aesthetic purpose in that way. So there's a lot to kind of have to tackle there, right? And I try to kind of liken this is to think about your favorite doctor or somebody that's kind of a medical professional that you trust. They don't preach at you, and they don't lecture you, but they will talk to you and say, you really need to kind of do X, Y, and Z. But also acknowledging that like you're a person and you're a human, you got to live your life, and you don't always want to just eat plain yogurt every day, like, stuff like that. Like we all know what we're supposed to do, but it's also like trying to balance it with a humanity and real life factored into it. And so when we were looking for that voice that was supposed to be kind of our symbolic human iteration of the Ergo voice, it was somebody who could actually be able to convey a certain degree of intelligence and authority in terms of knowing their stuff, right? And knowing all the stuff that you need to know about hearing loss and the technology required to help kind of address that with the devices that we have. But at the same time, with that degree of humanity and understanding and empathy to say, in addition to kind of knowing all this stuff and being the professional and the expert in this way, I'm also a person. And I get that, like, we're people talking to other people at the end of the day. And this is something that really needed to be humanized to get past a lot of whether it's stigma or lack of interest or just kind of, it's not even on my radar and I'm not really listening. But if somebody's really talking to you, like they really want to talk to you, you're going to stop and you're going to kind of pay more attention. You're not going to just hear, you're going to actually listen. And that was really kind of, our goal. And when I was talking to our producer and I said, we've got a lot of different options. And at first he gave me he had a bunch of folks that were men and a bunch of folks that were women, and male and female voices. And, my struggle with this was that we have a very kind of mysterious kind of black kind of kind of sexy male leaning product because it's all black and it's matte and it's very kind of like mysterioso, right?
Okay, yes, let's get into it. Keep doing it. Keep talking.
But you blend that with kind of that classic kind of Marlboro Man type of male authoritative. And I was like, I feel like, and this is not just me as a woman or whatever. I was like, it just sounded too preachy. And it sounded too like, I'm going to tell you and you need hearing aids. I'm like, I don't think anybody would want to be talked to in that way or given that kind of advice, right? And I also thought like this is already leaning more masculine. And granted, hearing loss at younger ages hitting more earlier in men than in women, but it still is, it's a gender neutral, age agnostic issue in today's world, right? So I was like, we're kind of missing the boat if we're only talking to like bros talking bros. And we've already got kind of this sexy kind of masculine energy visually going on with a product. I mean, this is it. This is the case, right? And these are the teeny tiny devices that once in, you can't even see.
Oh, you can't see
right?
it. No, you can't see it.
I didn't even put it in right, but I just did it to really quickly show you. So we've got this, and then our packaging is beautiful. But again, it's meant to be very kind of sexy and mysterious and dark and kind of like, because our whole signature has always been this like really great hand feel ergonomic kind of charger that you wouldn't be kind of embarrassed to have to like pull out, just like if you were to put in any sort of kind of personal device, earbuds, whatever, right? But when you've got this kind of energy going on, and then I was like, but this is something that we need to kind of democratize a little bit. And I feel like I actually feel like having a female voice will add a little bit more of that, kind of neutralize some of the heavy, kind of more masculine energy that we have going on with our visual identity, which is, this is part and parcel of it. And black on black with the design elements is sexy. And I wear a lot of black. Like, women like wearing a lot of black things too. But I think that being able to kind of balance that out. And then also, I think it takes a little bit of the preachiness out of it.
Why settle for the bare minimum when you can experience the full spectrum? Introducing Eargo 8 hearing aids. Extraordinary performance and cutting-edge technology in a hearing aid that's undetectable. Eargo 8.
Can we talk about that for a second? The preachiness. Building Doors is currently doing a series of videos called What a Woman Thinks During a, truck ad, beer ad, so on and so forth. And what I'm discovering by researching these is that they do all sound exactly how you just described. Very like grizzly man, testosterone, manly.
Right. Let's throw some axes.
Yeah, right?
And compare beards. I mean, that's...
And so from where you sit, like, I'm curious, and not just with Eargo, but maybe with other brands as well, when you say to the client, this is having a man would be preachy. We want to do something different. Let's counteract all the testosterone that's oozing out of this or on this side with a female voice or a female on camera. What kind of reaction do you get?
It's interesting because I've been on both sides of the fence, right? Having been on the agency side where I might have to be advising a client, they might always say like, this is the norm, or this is how it's been done, or this is how we have been doing it all this time. Right. And it's worked. And to whatever kind of success metric that had historically been in place, people are always really scared to mess with the thing, don't Don't mess with the goose that laid the golden egg, right? Don't mess up the magic formula. And there are certain things where, yes, it is an iconic part of the brand identity and it is something that is part of the heritage. And usually, with the exception of probably like the Marlboro Man, which is also a bygone era, right? Where that kind of machismo was such part and parcel of the imagery that was kind of established for, a cigarette, brand. But other than that, for a lot of these other products, I don't know that you necessarily have that anymore, where it has to be so gender specific because, there are kind of muscle cars or sports cars, and women increasingly are wanting to have and are able to become kind of the key target for a lot of those things, right? And a lot of those types of cars. And it doesn't have to be pink, it doesn't have to have a bow on it and stuff. And so there are things where you can just admire and like it for the power or for kind of the strong lines. And there is a certain degree, and when I say masculine or feminine, I'm not saying it in a male female gender thing, but there are certain things that are kind of in a design sense a little bit more leaning one way or the other. But it kind of goes both ways, right? Also, men's style has softened up a lot more too, right? So that it's not just kind of a rigid suit. Men's suiting and even fashion styles have gotten a lot more. So there's a lot more kind of fluidity going on that is not so gender assigned, and that you could say something looks or feels more masculine and feminine, but that it doesn't necessarily mean that it only has to be designated for men, like masculine for men and feminine for women. So in that same way, I think that there is an openness, right, amongst consumers and us as just kind of people and members of society, right? That if it's normal in my life, right? I wouldn't mind if like a brand is trying to talk to me and trying to sell me something that I'm going to be wanting or using in my life that is reflective of what my real life is like.
But to that point, yes, there are the general public, for the most part, yes, feels that way. But what about the brands? Why are 85% of all of the ads in the Super Bowl voiced by men? Why are 85% of all of the ads
even get me started
in the
on
Masters voiced by men? Like, I can go on and on. So like, what kind of conversation, and you don't have to name the brands, but have you ever had these conversations with brands and they're like, no, it's gonna be a man. It has to be a man.
So I do think that there is some of that kind of let's not mess with success. And there's a little bit of fear of failure if you veer off of what has either been tradition or historical measures of success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sometimes there is a blurring between what is some executional considerations versus what is actually truly part and parcel of the brand. Right. And so if the brand's kind of essence is to have, humanity with authority and expertise, those are all really important things. Right. And you want to be able to kind of convey that. It doesn't always have to sound like a male voice. And that ticks the boxes. And there's a certain tone or a manner in which that can happen. But there's a lot of other female voices that can actually convey that same thing. You were a prime example. If your listeners could have only kind of gone through the loads and loads of audition, submissions that we had, and we had every variation under the sun of male authoritative and expert intelligence with humanity and kind of a wit to it, right? Some were absolutely lacking of the humanity and wit and all about the authority. We're like, no, thank you very much, but that's a pass, right? There were some that were going a little too hammy, and I'm like, you're not at a comedy club. You're trying to be giving some serious kind of guidance and make people feel at ease about something that is something that's an uncomfortable thing, right? So there are things like that where I think that people might be a little afraid, right, to screw it up, especially in something like a Super Bowl where it is so expensive and the stakes are so high, and there is so clearly, I think we're at a crossroads where Super Bowl, the ad rates and stuff are insane. There's only a handful of, established brands that have kind of even factored that as part and parcel of their annual marketing budgets, right? Because it's not just the spot, right? It's not the 12 million or whatever it is now for that spot. It's the stuff that has to surround it. So it's a big chunk of change, right? That you've got to commit to that if you're going to do that as the old guard, established big players that have showed up at the Super Bowl time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got folks who are like, is this the one stunt of the year that we're going to do to try to get ourselves noticed? Because all the eyeballs,
wow.
right? I mean, how many times did Temu run that ad? Right? And it was like really bad animation and stuff, but it's just kind of like, yeah, but did it really change people's estimations of it? Did you really find yourself really kind of moved or touched, or was that amusing? Or did you have to endure it the 45 times that they seem to have shown up during that Super Bowl, that broadcast, right? So I think that there's a lot of stuff where the stakes are so high, it is so expensive. And I think marketers are kind of looking at it in a couple different ways. There's the kind of established that are like, this is our chance. It's curtain call, and we're going to show up and give them like, here's what we are up to, or here's where we are today. Mm-hmm. Some of it's really cool. Some of it needs a little work, maybe is work in progress, right? And then there are some newcomers that tried to kind of come up and say, okay, I'm in the big league now, and I want to show up like this, right? Then there are a bunch, and there's always a bunch each year, whatever the trend is du jour, right? It was crypto. It was some sort of .com. I'm sure it's going to be a ton of AI stuff coming up this year, right? So whatever the flavor of the moment, and the big, whoever wants to make a splash in that way is going to come and try to say, okay, this is world stage time. We're going to throw all our eggs in this basket and go for Super Bowl, like Super Bowl or bust.
And it doesn't include women.
And it often doesn't include women, because football, a lot of sports, a lot of televised sports have predominantly been looking, if you just look at the data from a media standpoint, viewership has often been male, in a certain demographic. And you can just kind of expect that you are going to surely reach X number of male viewership, right? And that is kind of the safest, biggest kind of like shooting fish in a barrel kind of scenario.
So it's safe. It's safe is what you're saying.
Exactly. It's kind of like they think this is the audience, and they're going to want to be talked to in a way that they feel familiar and they feel comfortable.
Grrr, manly testosterone.
Yeah, but then also I was like, wouldn't men, at least heterosexual men, wouldn't they want to hear from, women?
So you brought up an interesting point about AI, and I don't want to make this podcast episode about AI, but I do want to get your perspective just because you've worked with so many major brands. When I speak with brands, either via my role as a voice actor or through Building Doors, I get a lot of confirmation from these larger brands that they don't really have an interest in using AI voices. That due to what you brought up at the beginning of our discussion about authenticity and realness, that AI is not passing the sniff test yet.
No.
AI is,
it's kind of scary if it does, though, right?
And what's interesting is now with, I think it's called Sora, the video AI platform, some of my kids have said, oh, look at this. I'm like, that's fake. Well, how do you know it's fake? Because it says Sora on it. It's made with Sora. It is kind of scary how real life they are getting, but they're in my opinion, from what I've heard from brands, is that there's going to come a point where right now the sniff test is real. We know, you can tell. Yeah. Yep. And studies are showing that younger generations are scrolling right past it because they don't want to deal with it. They want real, authentic people. But it will get to a point where AI is so good that you won't be able to sniff it out.
Yep.
And at that point, what's going to happen? Because now advertisers will not be able to get anyone's attention, because even if it is real, they're not going to know it's real. So what do you see from from where you sit, the role of AI? How do you see AI in terms of creating advertising and even with voiceover?
I think that technology is wonderful. Progress is wonderful, right? There was once a time where people were like, cars, oh my God, right? And computers, who needs that when we have typewriters? Or, so I think that in some ways, AI is a wonderful tool to help kind of, cull things from the vast array that is the universe of kind of information and data and all that stuff. And in the medical world, like if you just think about how it can cross-reference and all that stuff. When it comes to creative, I think it's a little tricky, but I don't think that I'm not anti-AI, but I think that AI has a place and a utility. And I do sincerely hope it doesn't replace humans, right? And kind of the realness and the unexpected kind of twists and turns that humans take, and or sometimes you make a funny flub that is actually like that's what breaks the ice, or like there are those kind of like really kind of unexpected, unscripted, unanticipated moments that I don't know that AI could ever replicate something like that. So if there are things where it is very safe to say, I would love to be able to have something where the AI could render the product, right? The product, and have it fly in space and take a lot of the complexity out of having to create or shoot something like that, right? And the production around that, and to facilitate the production from a visual standpoint. If it is instructional and just very factually based, right? If you needed a video on how to put together this IKEA dresser, right? And I don't need a lot of cheering on. I don't need to feel good about myself. I just need to know like which pieces go with what, or if there's like a little nuance and you have to like wiggle it a certain way and stuff like that, right?
Have you ever put IKEA furniture together? Have you ever done that? Because you do need a lot of cheering on and a drink or two.
Right. But that's where the humanities needed, because you want someone to drink with you. But that probably doesn't help the IKEA construction process. It probably gets a little bit more in the way of that one. But my point being that for some of the things that are more reference or instructional, where moving sight and sound is very helpful, but the production, kind of the onus and the complexity of production makes it really hard or too expensive to be able to do it as widely or across a lot of things as much as you would like it to be. I think that there's some really great opportunities for AI to help facilitate that, and then to help be able to do that in a more cost-effective and kind of more time-efficient way.
Right.
I think that if you are trying, and that is because people are going to that as a reference, right? And to kind of just get information out of it or learn how to do something, right? And there's an instructional element to it. I think that if there's ever anything that requires kind of, like we said, attention, right? And engagement, and kind of, you're wanting to have some sort of connectivity with the viewer or your audiences in any way, then you probably are still better off having a human, because we all as humans understand kind of intrinsically, without having to kind of like break it down into code or into prompts, in terms of like, how do you actually make that happen? Or what is it that we're trying to convey? Right? A lot of times where, when we were trying to figure out, and we even did it with you, right? When we're talking about kind of the read and the performance that we wanted out of it. And we said, read it straight, kind of the way that feels natural to you. And then I said, okay, read it this way, as if you were trying to like make somebody feel like somebody's a little anxious, right? How would you read this if you're reading to somebody who feels kind of like a little anxious?
And AI can't do that right now.
No, right? And how, but as a voice actor, right? And what kind of nuance and performance you would kind of tweak in order to say, well, your listener is actually not paying attention. They kind of hear a voice, but they're not paying attention. Where would you hit the pauses, and how would you do it so that it would actually make somebody stop whatever else they were doing to be like, oh my gosh, wait, I got to listen. I got to pay attention. Right. Those are the kinds of things where I don't know how many prompts you can put in that you would be able to still get that. Right. And get that kind of very subtle, but a variety of kind of performances and inflections and kind of feeling out of a performance, whether it is voice or live action,
Sure.
as well. And I think that, we see it all the time when we're like, look like you're on a date, but you're on a date with your husband, but you're on a date. You're not just out to eat, right? You're on a date. How does that feel different than when you're just eating dinner at home, right? And there is something there, and people, you just did this because you know exactly what I meant by that. Your version in your head came up that way, right?
That's right.
Right. So that's the kind of stuff that I think, one, we have to know that we're looking for those kinds of things to get that kind of performance out of it, right? So whoever's looking for that, whether it be kind of the brand team or, with that I include kind of any of the brand stewards and the creatives, right? And you're saying, I want it to look and feel a certain way. But then also as the professional and as the actor, how do you get that performance? Like, you get the brief for the, and this is the direction that you've been given, but then how do you get that out of whatever it is that you're performing and you're delivering?
It's so nuanced. It
is, right.
Yeah. So if a voice actor wanted to, for lack of a better term, beat AI or to show how they're better than AI, they bring the nuanced emotional connection.
Yeah, and the variety and the context in that. I mean, people always say, well, you can get a lot of these things depending on the prompt, right? I'm like, well, you can get a lot of these things also depending on the direction that that you give to your professionals. Whether it's a computer or whether it's actual, real life humans, I think it is just as important, the brief that you kind of put in to the mix and the direction and kind of the kind of setting the stage for what you're trying to get out of it. And I really always thought of it as every single person on a shoot is our vested partner in making sure that we can get all these thoughts that are kind of swimming in my head, right? And I try my best to kind of explain it in every way possible so that I get that look that you just gave me, right? And then we're like, okay, she understands. So then it's like, okay, now go. Christy, go and do your thing. And then you'll do 5, 6 different variations of it. And I'd be like, number 4 nailed exactly what, like, it hit kind of all the marks of the things that we were hoping to achieve in the way that kind of like felt the most natural or fluid or authentic, all those things, right? Like and we did this to you several times. Like, we loved how you said this thing, but then you said it's so great, this other thing, like the back half of this other thing was like, if we could like mush it together, we would have the perfect take, right? But then you go back and you listen to it and you're like, okay, I got it. And then you created the perfect take with that next thing, because we were able to kind of, you were able to tap into like however you were delivering it in those different variations and then kind of fuse it together. But that's a collaborative effort. And I think AI right now is much better at like, you put it in and you get something out.
It's not collaborative, right? It's not collaborative.
And one might argue, well, it is if you just keep like, kind of fine tuning it. And I'm like, yeah, but yes and no. Like, if you want to get like mincing words and stuff, but I was like, that's not collaborative in the way that I'm expressing collaborative, because I'm saying, I know what I need to know and I know what I need to do as the brand steward or as the marketer. You know what you need to do and what you're capable of doing and what you can bring out as the voice actor, right? Or as the actor, I should just say in general, right? And what is the performance that you dig deep and you're able to bring out to match to whatever the brief and and kind of the, the setting that we have kind of put out there. And so you can't have one without the other,
Right.
You
Right.
need both. And that's why, and I mean that in a truly collaborative thing where, and then, you might get a curveball on one end or the other. And sometimes those kind of freestyle things also uncover a lot of interesting things where you're like, oh, I never even thought about it that way,
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think, at least to try, you don't always have to do it, right? But at least give it a shot.
Yeah.
Try it out without killing too much, time or anything, but you won't know until you try, at least for it.
You're not gonna know what's gonna come forward. You might
Yeah.
have a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
So you've led lots of different marketing efforts in a lot of different industries:
Yeah.
tech, beauty, luxury, cars. Have you noticed differences in how brands in those genres think about representation and inclusion?
Yeah.
How?
I think, well, when I do tech, and tech has been kind of interesting because there's kind of tech in terms of devices, there's tech in terms of services, and then there's tech, at least in my most recent life at Eargo, it's kind of med tech, which is actually has a much more kind of functional role in that way, right? And in those instances, it's usually talking to this kind of utopian ideal, and it is much less gender specific. It's almost kind of like neither, but one, which is good in some
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
It also runs the risk of being flat.
Oh,
Right?
interesting.
If it's neutral and
Huh.
it's neither this or that, it can run flat, right? So if you say something like, Dell, it was like they're huge and they have tons of different kind of computing divisions and products. It's not just laptops and stuff, but it's kind of like you don't associate kind of any sort of masculine or feminine energy or anything. It is. But then do you have any sense of what Dell stands for or what the brand is or anything like that? Competence, I think, right? And maybe to a certain degree kind of trust because they've been around and they've been doing that. But I don't know that there's any sort of emotional thing. I don't know that you need that. With luxury, it is completely the opposite, where it is all about the brand and the fantasy and the image and the this, right? And there are myths that are born out of this. And I'm buying into like, why else? If you just wanted red lips, you could pay $5 for the Wet n Wild at the drugstore.
Yes.
And yet women pay $50 for that plush click,
Yep.
of the case, and they spend lots of time, energy, money, and effort and research getting the right materials. The engineers, right, that have to look at getting the right plastics and the materials so that you get the plush click when you.
Wow.
The amount of time that we spent listening and the feel of that kind of closure. That has nothing to do with red lips at the end of the day, but it has everything to do with the experience and feeling like this is so decadent and luxurious and what you name the colors.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I'm all about the nail polish
Right?
name. I'm all about it.
But it depends on, the brand, and they would have seasonal stories, and it would be spring fling. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, this is the 45th variant of blushy pink, but you can't say blushy pink because you got to have something that's got to be like, cherry blossoms fluttering in the wind or some sort of imagery that you got to
Not
kind
the
of come up
cherry
with that,
blossoms.
right?
Oh,
So
no.
it is so about selling kind of the fantasy and the feeling and a lot of that kind of emotion around it. And so that is so much about the brand. And so that's why it was really, really interesting, because there's a lot more, as much as people say like, oh, it's so much about how you look or, and I was like, no, it's not. It's actually not just, yes, the aesthetics are super, super important, but it is the whole experience, because the click is not something that you see, but you feel it and you hear it when it's in your hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
The texture of the product, like it's the whole experience. And they really think through, I think the more kind of successful and established luxury marketers understand that it cannot just be on the surface, right? It can't just look good in pictures. It has to feel good. It has to smell good. It has to sound good for the things that you weren't even listening for until you hear the really shrill, clinky, cheap sounding plastic clack to the plush click that you get from that compact that you bought for a lot more money.
When the luxury brands are investing, obviously, so much research
So much
and
more.
and so much more than a Dell computers would, right? So sure, the non-binary voice, non-gender specific voice, or people on screen work for that.
Yeah.
So when you're telling the story of the luxury brands, one might say, "Oh, it should always be female," but we don't see that all the time either. I mean, we see plenty of men
Yeah.
in luxury fragrances,
Yes.
cars, even jewelry like men's bracelets, watches.
Yes.
So when it comes to inclusion with these brands, these luxury brands, is that even something that they think about since they put so much effort into so much in developing the product? At the end of the day, when it comes to advertising, what leads them to say, yeah, we want a woman or yeah, we want a man?
So I think when it comes to, at least in luxury for jewelry brands and for cosmetic brands, okay, so for jewelry, oftentimes you'll see just the object of desire, right? And you'll see that bauble that is just deliciously kind of shot and framed, and all you can do is just look at it and lust, whether it's the bag or the ring or whatever else it is, right? And then brands like Tiffany started kind of capturing the moment because, for most of us who are probably the target marker for these luxury brands, bags and jewels, right? But a lot of times, like, you don't buy all those things for yourself. They're gifted to you, or it's a special kind of commemoration. And so I think Tiffany did something interesting. And I think Patek did something really interesting when they started bringing emotion into that rather than just the object of desire. Tiffany started kind of showing and talking about it as celebrations, and they would show kind of like that proposal moment or the picture of the couple, right? And so in which case both are represented because, if in a classic marriage proposal setting, a woman gets proposed to by her intended, right? And so whoever that couple is, like, you have to be able to identify as either being the recipient or the
Receiver.
person doing the proposing kind of thing, right? The
Mhm.
fact that Patek did this thing where you're not buying, you're not just buying a watch, but you're just keeping watch over it for the next generation. And so it's automatically kind of like imprinted on people's heads that this is actually like this is a family heirloom in the making. I am not just spending all this like gobs of money on this very expensive watch for me. I'm doing this so that I can continue the legacy and hand it down to my heir, right? But that is very different than saying, look at this baller watch with all the bling-tastic features and whatever, and telling that kind of romance around it. I think with luxury, when it comes to cars, because luxury with cars were twofold. One is in the design, and then the other is in the performance, right? And you can't, like, there are some cars that look really good, but then they don't really perform that well. And then that won't really kind of cut mustard. And then if it's really all about power, but doesn't look slick or like sexy enough, it's going to have kind of its own little niches in that way. But if you're really trying to kind of find that healthy intersection of form and power, both genders want those things, right?
But then why are so many automotive commercials voiced by men then?
I think, but interestingly enough, like, it's a brand after I'd left, but Infinity actually tried to buck that trend, and they tried to target because they were noticing that it was in their kind of audience household a lot of times that family car decision to do something like the family SUV, but do something nicer, that was being made by the woman.
Yes.
And they decided to start featuring more female leads as the protagonist or start talking. But then I think they're trying to feel their way because you might have kind of the protagonist featured on camera be the female, or even their celebrity affiliations have been some females, right? But then they had VO for men. And so I think some of it is like
A
they're
balancing act.
experimenting, but they don't want to go too far off the rails. So they're trying to kind of find a little bit of a balance.
So I have 2 more questions for you.
Yeah.
One is, when you think about the next generation of marketers and creators, especially women, what doors do you think we need to keep building?
That's a good question. I think, luckily, and I think thankfully for our future generations or our younger generations coming up now, they don't have to kind of deal with the same kinds of stuff that I had to when I was kind of coming up, or you did it in your storied career as well, right? In terms of that, fighting for, making sure that you get credit, or fighting for that recognition, or making sure that your voice is being heard. But it also means that you have to show up and show yourself in a way where you are articulate and kind of framing what you have to offer in the best light possible, right? So I think whereas the more cliched notions of like, oh, how do I get past this in terms of inclusion for gender or for, all different backgrounds and all that stuff, I think that's less of the challenge. I do think it is for younger folks coming up. It's a balance between breadth and depth, right? Because I think that, in this kind of attention deficit society that we live in, where everybody's a multi-hyphenate, goat, egot, whatever, right? So they think that they can be good at everything and everything's going to be effortless, right? And you see a lot of these things for young people where they're almost afraid to fail because so much of what they're seeing is all about effortlessness and success and luxury and glossiness. And it all looks so like sparkly, right? And I think that behind all of that kind of effortlessness took a lot of practice and a lot of sweat and grit and effort and like dirtiness and like all of that stuff, right? But so oftentimes, they jump cut from kind of like, here I go to like, here it is, versus like that whole very long, messy kind of like complicated journey that happens in between kind of beginning and end. And I think by seeing that in such proliferation today, that maybe people start getting afraid to fail.
So you'd like to see more doors built for failure or opportunities to fail.
Normalizing failure as part of the process, because that's what you have to do.
All right.
And I mean, we had an entire discipline within our engineering team that's literally called failure analysis, right? I mean, it's taken like years for them to develop all the guts that go inside this stuff, right? And the brilliant engineers that I don't even understand half the time what they're talking about. And I'm like, you have to explain to me like 5 more times for me to understand and like distill it down to like plain English and not super techie terms. But then I'm like, okay, now I understand, right? But it's because they went tirelessly through many iterations where we got only to here and then it failed. Then they're like, what happened? They tear it apart to figure out like what did not happen so that it could get to that next stage. So then they're like, okay, we're going to address these things to make sure that we don't end up in that same spot. So they analyze the failures over and over and over again so that you can say, okay, now I learn through my mistakes what to do, what not to do, or how to get better at some of this stuff, right? I say this to my daughter, and we, as parents probably say it to all of our kids, like, no one's good at anything the first time they try, right? And I can't tell you how many times I bit it every time I had to learn a new jump or a spin. Like I used to figure skate, right? And I was like, I just knew that when I was learning something new, I was just my butt was going to be wet and sore because I was going to land on my butt like 95 times out of the 100 times that I tried. And then by some small miracle, it all starts to kind of click, and then you nail it once, and then you're just like, please let that not have been just a miracle, and let me just keep practicing, but you'll still fall. You're not going to nail it every time after that, right? And so I think the notion of normalizing, and failure sounds like such a big, scary word, but for mistakes and then kind of like iterative processes in and along the way as part of the normal. And I think that will, because what a lot of times it'll happen is like at the first sign of failure, like, I forget it. And then they move on to the next thing, right? Or that's not interesting. That's getting hard. I'm going to try something else, right? Versus like, you got to work through the hard parts a bit. And that's where you start getting into depth.
And building character.
Absolutely. But I think that, you know, in that muck and in that struggle is where you really get a much more, you know, a much more robust kind of understanding of what's going on or what you're doing and why. And then it'll just make it that much better for the next time. Right. And so I think that failure or that first kind of misstep could be the opportunity you didn't even realize. Just how we were saying, like, let's riff sometimes, like things not going the way that you thought it was is the best thing that can happen, because it's stretching your brain and your abilities to think a little differently. And that's how you won't be like the lemmings and end up with the same male voice for that same Super Bowl ad all the time. And you won't be just afraid. You won't be afraid to do, oh my God, like I'm breaking all the rules. But it's like, you're not blindly doing it. You've actually like done all the heavy lifting along the way. And you said, these are my reasons, right? These are all the reasons why I've decided to do it this way. And I feel pretty good about it, right? I feel like this is what we need. So it was not, in your case, it wasn't just like I'm feeling female voice today kind of thing. You know, we knew what we were working with our product. We knew the kind of situation our audiences or our intended audiences and folks that we hope would pay attention, right, and listen.
Yeah.
What the world that they're living in, their minds that they were kind of around. A lot of times, even if it is a male kind of intended user, the women in their families are the ones that are telling them, I think it would benefit you. And I can't even tell you how many of our customers started out because their, you know, spouses, their children, their daughters, the women in their lives are the ones that are like, I would really like to get my, enter husband, father, brother, like this for, it's kind of like, not the sexiest, Christmas present kind of thing to you'd be asking for, but they're like, I think my loved one, my male loved one actually could really use this. So they're listening and they're noticing and they're seeing these ads and saying, I found you guys because I saw this ad and that's so my dad,
right,
husband,
that's so my right.
So I think that as our kind of the next generation of marketers come up, and I think that there is, with a lot of the technology and with a lot of the kind of fast-pacedness of kind of decision making and so much focus around like, the immediate sales, right? And it shows in the metrics, and you can't just let short-term metrics kind of drive some of the decisions that you need to make that are going to have much longer-term implications around that. And those are the things where you really need to kind of know yourself as the brand, right? Know what you stand for, and will these actions still be able to pay off in the mid to longer term and not just the immediate like quarter over quarter sales results, right? Because you could sell one today but lose them for the next round, right? If you're only focused on the short term. So this is where it's kind of like, learn from this. Don't think that you can just keep doing it this way, but learn from it. So there's like, how do you grow that? Or if you have to change it up, like how do you mix it up in ways that it actually is allowing for growth?
Great answer. So my last question is a question that I ask every podcast guest. What does your door to success look like? What does it look like on the outside? And when you open it, what do you see?
I think, well, at least from the aesthetic standpoint, I would say that mine is a really kind of, I'm very kind of sleek and minimal, but I would say it's like a heavy duty, but very modern big overscaled door that's wood with kind of like a big steel bar that you pull. So it kind of is like it's on its kind of pivot hinge rather than kind of the door hinges. That opens up into kind of like, and you see kind of the ocean out ahead. And I am surrounded with everybody that are near and dear to my heart in terms of my daughter, my husband, my family, my friends. And I consider myself very lucky that I have special people from every kind of big life stage of life, but also amongst them are my work friends too, right? People that I have come along the way, and you have work besties, but then they're really your friends when you actually keep them beyond kind of that job and that office setting and stuff. So I have picked up all these people along the way, and the best thing that I can hope for myself and for all of us is that we are healthy and happy and well and feeling kind of fulfilled in what we are doing in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives. And when it comes to kind of personal life, that, I want my family to be healthy and happy, but obviously finding kind of their true north and their passion, and being able to enjoy it and be able to kind of find some sort of calling that allows them to be able to blend that or incorporate that into their lives. And then I would say professionally, I think that an opportunity where I get to do the stuff that I like to do. I mean, I'm good at things, but there are some things that you're good at that you don't always like to do, right? Like if you have to do it, you can do it, kind of thing. But ideally, I love to kind of like solve puzzles, right? That's just the way that my mind works. So if I'm just left to kind of like figure some stuff out and be able to do that and be able to figure out some of these things and create something that is of use, and we get to do that to help market and sell something that not only makes people look pretty or feel good or show off, which is all really nice things, right? Blingy luxury things are all really wonderful, whether they be in cars, jewelries, or things that you eat and drink. But I think one thing that was really, really so special about kind of my most recent time is you get to have an opportunity where something you wanted to like work really well, look really good, right? And be really cool in that way. But most importantly, it actually is materially helping somebody. We're helping people hear, which is like hearing is one of the, 5 senses that make us human, right? It's one of the most fundamental things that are a part of the human experience. And I think that only people after they have started kind of suffering from that kind of loss realize how much they were missing. And then when it gets a chance to restore back, and how they're able to reconnect. And that was really humbling, because I thought, for all the other things, and I've marketed lots of different widgets in every single, configuration to men, women, everything in between. But then it's kind of like you get that other thing where people are just like, you've helped me kind of regain my life again. And you realize you've helped people, not just in a feel good kind of way, but like really helped in that way. And it is really a whole nother kind of level of gratitude, frankly, to feel like the efforts that we put in, whether professionally or, with our time, and a lot of things that are away from the loved ones that we're just talking about, right? And if you have to make those kinds of sacrifices to know that that is able to come back and pay off this kind of dividend where it was truly meaningful and helpful to other people, that is the best thing I could wish for.
Oh, great answer. Great answer. Well, I have to say, number one, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed speaking to you and being able to, I hate the term, but pick your brain, because you're in a spot that not a lot of voice actors get to have a conversation like this with. And you provided a lot of insight. So thank you so much, Kyong, for your time and sharing your expertise. And thank you for joining us on the Building Doors podcast, to all the listeners and watchers. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/buildingdoors. Together, we're elevating voices, building doors, and making space for the next generation of women breaking barriers. Thanks for joining us.